2008 National Medal of Arts to Stan Lee for his groundbreaking work as one of America's most prolific storytellers, recreating the American comic book. His complex plots and humane superheroes celebrate courage, honesty, and the importance of helping the less fortunate, reflecting America's inherent goodness.
Stan Lee is a giant, and a giant like Walt Disney is a giant.
He created Spider-Man and Hulk and Fantastic Four, X-Men and Iron Man.
These characters are larger than life.
Stan Lee is a pioneer in the truest sense.
Without him, there are no comic book stories, no Marvel stories really being told.
He really put himself into the comics.
He hooks into old, tried and true themes, but he's done it in a way that I don't think anyone else has.
Stan was really the first comic book writer to make the human being behind the mask more important than the mask itself.
The most famous name in American comic book history.
Stan Lee.
Stan Lee.
Stan Lee.
Stan is very hot.
He's 86. I look older than he does.
The man who kind of changed the face of comics.
That's Stan Lee. That's, I'm like, oh my God. It influenced the lives of like millions and millions.
And he's really become a major icon himself.
When I met him on the set, I saw everybody crowding around him. And, it was like Mick Jagger was there.
I've been here for 3 days waiting for Stan Lee. I just relate to so much of what Stan Lee writes in his characters.
Peter Parker reminds me of myself.
Learn to read because of Spider-Man comics.
Stan Lee.
We love you, Stan!
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you very much.
I'm the greatest fan ever.
Creating comics was never part of my childhood dream. I never thought of that at all. Believe it or not, I wanted to be an actor. I'd go to the movies and I'd think, gee, I wish I were up there on the screen. That must be the most fun you could have. I remember my really first hero was Errol Flynn.
Did I upset your plan?
Well, my upbringing was in the Depression days.
We lived in the Bronx on University Avenue.
That old apartment that we lived in, wow, I hated that. My mother and father slept in a couch in the living room that opened up into a double bed, and I slept in a little bedroom in a bed. I still remember how important it was to have enough money for a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk. One biggest worry my mother and father had that I used to hear them repeating all the time is, what'll we do if we can't scrape enough money together for the rent this month? And that went on and on. My father was too worried about just getting a job. The poor guy was out of work most of the time, which is why I was working even when I was in school. I always had part-time jobs. When I was 16, I worked in the world's second largest trouser manufacturing company. Then I got a job as an usher in New York at the Rivoli Theater in Times Square. I got into comics by accident when I heard there was a job open at Magazine Management. They wanted me to work in the comic department. Some department, it was two people, Joe and Jack. And they were the two who were really running Timely Comics when I came there to work.
Jack was the artist, and he did some of the writing also. Joe was the writer mainly, but he was also the editor. So he was the one I had most to do with. He'd send me down for sandwiches or ask me to fill an inkwell. I mean, I did a lot of real journalistic things with him.
I remember the first day he came here, he came to the office. He had a little flute, and he'd sit in the corner and play his flute and drive Jack Kirby crazy. I never thought when he came to the office he would make it.
There was a time when they needed a two-page filler.
Each comic book had to have 2 pages of prose to be accepted for second-class mailing privileges. And it was our contention that nobody ever read that stuff. So I started Stan on writing these 2 pages.
I thought, wow, my first assignment. So I wrote one called, I think, Captain America, The Traitor's Revenge.
Stan treated the thing with great respect. He was now a professional writer.
My name at the time was Stanley Martin Lieber. I took my first name, Stanley, and cut it in half. I didn't want to use the name Stanley Martin Lieber because I was saving that for the great American novel, which I never wrote.
After about 10 issues of Captain America, less than a year, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby suddenly left the entire company, and all of a sudden we didn't have an editor. Captain America was left in the lurch without its main writer and artist.
I looked around to see who'd replace them, and I realized there was nobody. I was the only guy there. So the publisher, Martin Goodman, he said, do you think you can hold down the job of editor and art director and head writer until I get, a real person? I was about, 18. I said, sure, I can do it.
It's more that he was there. He was writing. He was even a relative. But the main thing was he also would have recognized that Stan was a bright kid. He's working cheap, So why not put him in charge?
I wrote a lot of the Captain America stories, but then eventually a lot of other writers did because there wasn't time for me to write everything.